January 2025. Russia loses its 100th T-90M tank in Ukraine. The Russian army's most advanced tank, once hailed by Putin himself as the best in the world, is systematically being destroyed by Ukrainian drones and Javelin missiles. But here's the shocking truth that no one is talking about. The T-90M is based on the T-44 from 1944. And the T-44? It's based on German engineering insights Stalin gained in Kubinka in 1943. When Soviet engineers analyzed their first captured Tiger I, 82 years later, Russian tank crews are dying because of design choices that trace back to that analysis. Today, I'm going to show you what Stalin really found in Kubinka, what the secret reports about the Tiger revealed, and how those findings created a lineage of tanks that produced over 100,000 vehicles and still fights on the battlefields of Ukraine today. Late 1942, the siege of Leningrad. Soviet troops managed to capture a German Tiger I tank, not just any damaged tank, a fully functional Tiger with its armor intact. The tank is immediately transported to Kubinka. Kubinka wasn't just any ordinary place. It was the Soviet Union's top-secret tank testing ground. Since 1931, all new Soviet designs were tested here. But Kubinka had another function as well. Captured enemy vehicles were disassembled, analyzed, and examined for weaknesses. By the time the Tiger arrived, Stalin already knew about the disasters happening at the front. Soviet 76mm guns could not penetrate the Tiger head-on. Not at 500 meters, not at 100 meters, not at all. The Tiger's 100mm of frontal armor proved impenetrable to every standard weapon in the Red Army's arsenal. Stalin ordered a complete analysis. Everything was to be documented. Every weld, every armor angle, every weakness. The Kubinka engineers began systematic firing tests. They fired every available weapon at the Tiger: 45mm anti-tank guns, ineffective 76mm T-34 guns, rounds ricocheted off the frontal armor. Even the new 85mm M1939 anti-aircraft gun could only penetrate the Tiger at specific angles and distances. The reports that went back to Moscow were alarming. German tank technology was years ahead of Soviet technology. Soviet generals were shocked. The T-34 was considered the best tank in the world, but against the Tiger, it was helpless. The Kubinka tests revealed an uncomfortable truth. The Germans had developed a tank in just 2 years that overwhelmed all Soviet weapons. Field reports confirmed the lab findings. At Kursk in July 1943, Tigers decimated entire tank battalions. A single Tiger, under the command of Lieutenant Franz Staudegger, destroyed 22 Soviet tanks in a single day. The psychological effect was devastating. Soviet tank crews developed a full-blown Tiger phobia. They reported Tigers even where there weren't any. Stalin demanded immediate solutions. He wanted to understand how to defeat this beast. And the Kubinka engineers delivered answers. But the Kubinka engineers also found something else. The Tiger had critical weaknesses. The first weakness was its weight, 57 tons. That made it slow and difficult to transport. Soviet bridges couldn't support that weight. Most German bridges couldn't either. The Tiger needed special fording equipment to cross rivers. The second weakness was the powertrain. The Maybach HL230 engine produced 700 horsepower. Impressive for 1942, but at 57 tons, that meant only 12.3 horsepower per ton. The T-34 had 18.9 horsepower per ton. The Tiger couldn't keep up with the T-34, not in the mud, not in the snow, not in the endless Russian steppes. The third weakness was maintenance. The Kubinka engineers disassembled the transmission. The ZF gearbox was a masterpiece of German precision, but that was exactly the problem. It required specialized tools. It required trained mechanics. It required spare parts that could only be manufactured in Germany. In the field, a broken transmission meant a lost tank. The Soviets realized that reliability was more important than perfection. But the most important discovery concerned the armor itself. The Tiger had 100 millimeters of frontal armor, but it was vertical, 90 degrees to the horizontal. Every hit struck the full armor thickness. No deflection, no additional effective thickness from sloping. The Soviet engineers knew the principle of sloped armor from the T-44. A 55-degree slope meant that a 45mm shell hit an effective thickness of about 80 meters. If the Tiger had sloped its 100mm armor at 55 degrees, the effective thickness would have been over 170 meters. Why hadn't the Germans done that? The Kubinka report speculated production complexity. Sloped armor required more complicated welds, more complicated shaping, more time in the factory. The Germans had sacrificed quantity for quality, but the Soviets saw an opportunity. What if you could combine the firepower of the Tiger with the mobility of the T-34 and sloped armor? Stalin called Morozov. Alexander Alexandrovich Morozov, the designer of the T-34, the genius behind the most successful tank of World War II, autumn 1943, Morozov receives a direct order from Stalin: develop a new tank, combine the best of the T-34 with the lessons learned from the Tiger analysis. But there was a critical requirement. The tank had to remain secret, so secret that even the Allies couldn't find out about it. Stalin knew that the war would end eventually. And then Allies would become rivals again. The new tank would be a trump card that no one knew about. Morozov began with what the Kubinka analysis had revealed. First, the armor. The new armor should be 75mm thick, less than the Tiger, but sloped at 55 degrees. That resulted in an effective thickness of about 130 mm, more than the Tiger, at significantly less weight. Second, the turret. The T-34 turret had a critical problem. The pivot point was too far forward. That meant a long, overhanging gun recoil. Morozov moved the turret back, towards the center of the chassis. This simple change changed everything. The center of gravity improved. Accuracy improved. The interior space became more efficient. Third, the engine. The new V-44 engine was installed transversely, a revolution in tank design. All previous tanks had the engine installed longitudinally. The transverse installation dramatically shortened the engine compartment. The weight saved could be invested in armor. The volume saved allowed for a larger fighting compartment. In November 1943, Morozov presented the first design. Its designation was T-44, Object 136. In January 1944, the first prototype was ready. It was immediately taken to Kubinka for testing against captured German tanks. The tests were revealing. The T-44 was pitted against a captured Panther. The German Panther in 1943 had been the answer to the T-34, 44.8 tons, 80 millimeters of frontal armor at 55 degrees. The Germans had learned from their encounters with the T-34, but the T-44 went even further. In the comparison tests, it became clear that the T-44 was superior to the Panther in mobility, better acceleration, better maneuverability, lower profile, but the armor was a problem. In the firing tests against the Tiger Sen's 88mm gun, the T-44 could be penetrated at distances under 2,000 meters. The frontal armor was not strong enough. Morozov went back to the drawing board. The production version of the T-44A received strengthened armor, 90mm on the hull front, 120mm on the turret front, both angled. The weight increased to 31.8 tons, still almost half the weight of the Tiger I, but with better effective armor. On November 23, 1944, the T-44A was officially put into service. Production began in Kharkov, in the factory that had built the T-34 before the war. And here comes the amazing part. The T-44 was never used in World War II. 3 tank brigades received the T-44 in September 1944 for training, but Stalin forbade its combat deployment. The official justification was logistical, lack of spare parts, lack of training for mechanics, but that was not the real reason. Stalin didn't want the Allies to know about this tank. Not the Americans, not the British, nobody. The T-44 was Stalin's secret weapon for the post-war era. Production continued anyway. By 1947, 1,123 T-44s had been built. Then production switched to a new model, the T-54. The T-54 was the further development of the T-44. Larger turret, more powerful 100mm gun, improved armor. But the basic design was identical. The transverse engine arrangement, the angled armor, the central turret position. Everything came from the T-44. Everything was based on the findings of the Kubinka analysis of 1943. And the T-54 became the most produced tank in history. Together with its successor, the T-55, approximately 100,000 units were built between 1947 and 1981. 100,000 tanks, all of which can be traced back to that Kubinka analysis, all based on the lessons learned from the captured Tiger I. The irony is bitter. The Germans developed the Tiger I as a wonder weapon. 56 tons of steel and firepower. But the Soviet analysis revealed that the concept was flawed, too heavy, too complex, too maintenance-intensive. The Soviets took the strengths of the Tiger I, the thick armor, the powerful gun, and combined them with Soviet pragmatism, sloped armor instead of mass, simplicity instead of complexity, reliability instead of perfection. The result was a tank family that dominated the Cold War. T-44, T-54, T-55, T-62, T-72, T-80, T-90M, all go back to those Kubinka tests of 1943. All carry the genetic heritage of the T-44. And all carry the weaknesses that were already present in the T-44. But what weaknesses exactly? Here, it gets interesting. The Kubinka engineers made a discovery in 1943 that they never fully resolved. The Tiger. I had a fundamental design flaw. The ammunition storage. The 80mm shells were stored in the turret basket and along the hull sides. A hit in these areas meant a catastrophic explosion. The entire tank became a firebomb. The Soviets saw this problem. But their solution was not a real solution. In the T-44, the ammunition was concentrated in the turret basket. Fewer shells along the hull, but still in the turret. And this arrangement was maintained across all subsequent models. T-54, T-55, T-62, T-72, all have the ammunition concentrated in the turret. And then, in 1972, came the fatal decision. The T-72 received an automatic loading system, the carousel, 22 shells in a rotating ring under the turret. That saved space, that saved a loader, that made the tank more compact, but it concentrated all the ammunition at one point, directly under the crew. In Ukraine, they call it the jack-in-the-box effect. A hit on the carousel and the ammunition explodes. The turret is thrown hundreds of feet into the air. The crew has no chance of survival. The temperature inside rises to over 3,000 degrees in a fraction of a second. The shockwave tears everything apart. There is no way out, no time to react, no possibility to escape. Ukrainian drone pilots document these explosions daily. The videos go viral. Turkish Bayraktar drones filmed the first of these explosions in 2022. Then came the FPV kamikaze drones, small drones with explosive charges that fly directly into the weak spots. The price of such a drone is about $500. The price of a T-90M is about $4.5 million. The cost-loss ratio is catastrophic. The bill is devastating for Russia. That's exactly what's happening to the T-90M in Ukraine. Over 100 destroyed T-90Ms, and a large part of that due to ammunition explosions, because a design flaw that was identified in the Kubinka analysis of 1943 was never properly resolved. 82 years from the Tiger I analysis to the burning T-90Ms in Ukraine. A direct line of failure. But the Kubinka analysis had even deeper implications that reached as far as Berlin and as far as Washington, because what was discovered in Kubinka did not stay in the Soviet Union. October 1946, Operation Osoaviakim. At 3 a.m. on October 22nd, MVD officers knocked on doors throughout the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. 2,200 German specialists were pulled from their beds, along with 4,000 family members. Over 6,000 people. They were loaded onto freight trains, 92 trains in total. Destination, Soviet Union. Most of these specialists were aviation and rocket engineers, Junkers, Messerschmitt, Heinkel, BMW, but there were also tank specialists, metallurgists, welding engineers, men who had worked on the Tiger production, men who knew the secrets of German armor. Stalin didn't just want the Tiger analysis, he wanted the men who had built the Tiger. Among those deported was Helmut Gottrup, a rocket scientist from Peenemünde. Gottrup worked in the Soviet Union for 12 years. He helped develop the Soviet R-1 and R-2 rockets. And he later invented something amazing, the chip card, in 1967. A German scientist deported by the Soviets invented the technology that's now in every credit card. But that's another story. Ferdinand Brandner was another deportee, an engine engineer. He played a crucial role in developing the Mk-12, the largest turboprop engine ever built. It still powers the Tupolev Tu-95 bombers, Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. The connection between German technology and Soviet military might was direct. No intermediaries, no interpretation. German engineers built Soviet weapons, and the Kubinka analysis was the catalyst. It showed Stalin what was possible, what the Germans could do, and what he needed to take. But the story had another twist. Because while Stalin was bringing German engineers to the Soviet Union, the Americans were doing the exact same thing. Operation Paperclip, 1,600 German scientists and engineers were brought to the USA, including Werner von Braun, the father of the V-2 rocket, who would later build the Saturn V, the rocket that took men to the moon. Both superpowers plundered German knowledge. Both built their post-war arsenals on German technology, and both hid this fact for decades. It was an open secret that no one wanted to talk about. The great achievements of the Cold War, the moon landing, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the supersonic bombers, all had German fingerprints on them. But in the official history books, it was concealed. The American version spoke of American ingenuity. The Soviet version spoke of Soviet superiority. Both versions were lies. The Kubinka analysis of the Tiger was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle of stolen knowledge, of deported scientists, of secret operations, a puzzle that shaped the entire post-war order, from tanks to rockets, from airplanes to computers. German technology became the foundation of the Cold War, on both sides. But back to tank technology, because here lies the real irony. The T-44 was based on the Kubinka analysis of the Tiger. But the Leopard 1 was also based on German insights from World War II, and the M1 Abrams was partially based on German tank concepts. The three great tank families of the Cold War, Soviet, American, German, all go back to the same root, to the lessons of World War II, to the Tiger, to the Panther, to the T-34. The Kubinka analysis wasn't unique. The Americans conducted similar tests in Aberdeen, the British in Bovington. Everyone analyzed captured German tanks. Everyone learned the same lessons. Sloped armor is more efficient than vertical armor. Mobility is more important than pure weight. Reliability beats complexity, but each nation drew different conclusions. The Soviets chose mass production and simplicity. 100,000 T-44s and T-55s, cheap, robust, easy to repair. The Americans chose technology and protection, fewer tanks, but each with state-of-the-art equipment, with composite armor, with computerized fire control. The Germans chose a middle ground, Leopard 1 for mobility, Leopard 2 for firepower and protection, and now in Ukraine. We see these philosophies clashing, T-90M versus Leopard 2, Soviet legacy versus German legacy, both with roots in the Kubinka analysis of 1943. The Ukrainian battlefields are a testament to the longevity of these designs. Russia has lost over 3,000 tanks. Western estimates even exceed 4,000. The largest tank battle since Kursk in 1943. Ironically, T-72, T-80, T-90, all descendants of the T-44, all with the same fundamental problem, the carousel ammunition storage. The jack-in-the-box effect. Ukrainian Javelin missiles hit the roof, FPV drones hit the turret, and the tank explodes because a design flaw identified in Kubinka in 1943 was never fixed. But the Leopard 2s have also suffered losses. 18 Leopard 2A4s and 2A6 have been destroyed or damaged, mostly by mines, some by anti-tank missiles. But not a single Leopard 2 has had an ammunition explosion like the Russian tanks. Why? Because the Germans solved the ammunition storage problem differently. In the Leopard 2, the ammunition is stored in the rear of the turret, behind armored bulkheads, with blow-off panels to the outside. A hit on the ammunition leads to an explosion, but the explosion goes outward, not inward. The crew has a chance to survive. The Soviets knew this concept. They chose not to use it because it made the turret bigger, because it meant more weight, because it didn't fit the philosophy of mass production. 82 years after the Kubinka analysis, Russian tank crews are paying the price for that decision with their lives. But the story of the T-44 has another aspect, one that's rarely discussed: the propaganda. Stalin hid the T-44 from the Allies, but he also hid something else, the origin of the design. In Soviet historiography, the T-44 was a triumph of Soviet engineering. Morozov was a genius. The T-34 was the best tank of the war. The T-44 was its logical evolution. No mention of the Kubinka analysis, no mention of German influences, no mention of the deported engineers. The Soviet version was pure, patriotic, homegrown. This version persisted for decades in the Soviet Union, in the satellite states, even in the West. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 were archives opened, documents declassified, reports published. And the truth came to light. The T-44 was not a purely Soviet creation. It was the result of a systematic analysis of German technology, combined with Soviet production, and enhanced by German engineers, working under duress. The Kubinka reports still exist at the Kubinka Tank Museum, which is now called Patriot Park. The same Tiger I that was analyzed in 1943 is still there for visitors to see, but the connection to the T-44 is never explained. The displays speak of Soviet superiority, of German mistakes, of Soviet victory. The inconvenient truth that Soviet tanks were based on German analysis remains unmentioned, even today, even in 2025, while T-90M tanks are burning in Ukraine. Let me summarize the technical lineage again. 1942. A Tiger I is captured, brought to Kubinka. 1943. A complete analysis is performed, strengths identified, weaknesses documented, sloped armor is identified as the solution. 1943. Stalin orders a new tank. Morozov begins development. 1944. The T-44 prototype is finished, tested against Panther and Tiger tanks. 1944. The T-44A enters production, kept secret from the Allies. 1945. The war ends. The T-44 is never deployed. 1946. Operation Ossuaviashim. 200 German engineers are deported. 1947. T-54 production begins, based on the T-44. From 1947 to 1981, 100,000 T-54s and T-55s are built, the most produced tank in history. 1972. The T-72 is introduced with its carousel ammunition storage, the fatal flaw. 1992, the T-90 is introduced, an evolution of the T-72, same flaw. 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. T-90Ms are deployed. 2025, over 100 T-90Ms destroyed, many due to ammunition explosions, the jack-in-the-box effect. 82 years, from the Kubinka analysis to the Ukrainian battlefield, a direct line, an unchanged flaw, thousands of dead crews. That's the legacy of the Kubinka analysis. A legacy that endures to this day, a legacy that no one in Moscow wants to discuss. These technical truths aren't just history. They're in every tank fighting in Ukraine today, in every T-90M, in every Leopard 2, in every Abrams. The decisions of 1943 still determine who lives and who dies. If you appreciate this technical documentation, if you want to understand why modern weapons look the way they do, if you want to see the hidden lines that connect the past and present, then show it. Click on Super Thanks. Every bit of support enables further research, further revelations, further uncomfortable truths. The 1943 Kubinka analysis changed tank design forever. It created a design lineage that spawned 100,000 tanks. It influenced Soviet, American, and German developments. It still contributes to death and destruction in Ukraine. The Tiger, in 1943, was the symbol of German tank might. 57 tons of steel and firepower. But the Soviet analysis revealed its weaknesses, and those weaknesses became the blueprint for Soviet strength: sloped armor, compact design, mass production. Those were the lessons of Kubinka. Those were the principles of the T-44. Those are the characteristics of the T-90M 82 years later. The circle closes, but one question remains, a question that everyone should ask. Why did the Russians never correct the fundamental flaw? The ammunition storage in the turret, the carousel, the jack-in-the-box effect. They knew about it for decades, but they changed nothing. Why? The answer is terrifyingly simple. Cost. A separate ammunition compartment, like in the Leopard 2, requires a larger turret. A larger turret means more weight. More weight means a more powerful engine. A more powerful engine means more fuel. More fuel means greater logistics. The entire Soviet and Russian tank doctrine is based on mass, on quantity, on the idea that 10 simple tanks are better than 5 complex ones. That doctrine worked in World War II, T-34s against Tigers, 5-1 losses. But in the end, the T-34s won because there were more of them, because they could be built faster, because every dead tank could be replaced. But in Ukraine, that doctrine no longer works, because modern anti-tank weapons are too precise, because drones can see every tank, because a single soldier with a javelin can destroy a T-90M. Mass no longer matters. What matters is crew survival, and that's exactly what Russian tanks don't offer, because they're based on a design that began in Kubinka in 1943, on a design that prioritized mass production over crew protection, on a design that was never fundamentally revised. 82-year-old mistake. Modern consequences. A flaw that runs through every generation of Soviet and Russian tanks. A flaw that Western military experts have known about since the 1980s. A flaw that is not spoken about in Moscow, not even today. The 1943 Kubinka analysis isn't just history. It's a warning that technical decisions outlast generations, that mistakes, once made, are hard to correct, that institutions often cling to outdated concepts. The Tiger wasn't perfect. The T-44 wasn't perfect. The T-90M isn't perfect. But they are all connected. They all carry the legacy of those days in Kubinka. They all pay the price for decisions made 8 decades ago. Now, I'd like to hear your opinion. Russia is losing over 100 of its best tanks in Ukraine, all with the same design flaw, a flaw that was known in 1943. Was it a mistake to never change this design lineage, or was it a conscious decision that made sense in its time? Write your thoughts in the comments, because this discussion is important. It doesn't just concern tanks. It concerns the question of how we deal with technical mistakes, how we evaluate old designs, how we decide what needs to be changed and what doesn't. The 1943 Kubinka analysis changed everything. 100,000 tanks, 82 years of development, and a flaw that still kills. That's the legacy of the Tiger. That's the tragic legacy of the T-44. That's the legacy that's burning in Ukraine today. A legacy of steel and fire. A legacy that began with a secret analysis in Kubinka and that ends with burning tanks on the fields of Ukraine. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. But it rhymes, and sometimes that rhyme is deadly. Deadly for thousands.